Hi, and welcome to AFI DOCS 2020 and this discussion of Women in Blue. My name is Sarah Harris. I am the Senior Programmer for AFI Festivals. I want to thank a couple of our supporters of the festival. First, our presenting sponsor, AT&T, our AFI members, and you, our audience, for watching. Thanks for being here. So we are here, as I mentioned, to discuss Women in Blue, which you've just watched. And this film was set to premiere at the Tribeca Film Festival and is a virtual world premiere here at AFI DOCS. And I am very honored to be talking to a couple of the ladies from the film and our filmmaker. So please help me welcome Director Deirdre Fishel and Chief Harteau, excuse me, and CJ Johnson, and Chief Melissa Chiodo. So I will start us off with one question, and this is really for Deirdre. Tell us a little bit about the origin of this particular project. I'm curious if you had specific ties to Minneapolis, if you were kind of looking at various police departments, and then how you came to MPD as the one in earning the trust of Chief.
Well, I just want to back up to even what is sort of made me pursue making a film about women in policing. I was filming my last film a couple of blocks away from where Eric Garner was killed by the NYPD. And it's not, I just sort of have to say, it's not lost on me, the sort of tragic irony that Eric Garner's last words of "I can't breathe" are the words that George Floyd was crying out when he was killed by the NPD on Memorial Day. But I was so upset about that incident, and I turned to the only cop I knew, was a woman named Sally Norris, and I asked her if it could have happened on her watch. And she said it absolutely couldn't have, that this rookie had escalated the situation very quickly out of control, and that she would have started by saying, "Hey, my name is Sally Norris, what's yours?" And I started thinking, do women police differently? It's not something that I had ever kind of thought about. And when I found statistics going back to the 1990s that showed that women officers' policing style tends to focus more on communication and de-escalation, and that they use excessive force in significantly lower numbers, I knew that I wanted to pursue the topic. And I was looking at police departments all around the country that would make sense. I talked a lot with the Pittsburgh Police Department, but I was always interested in Minneapolis for really two reasons. One, because it's still extremely rare to have a woman chief, and that's of a major American city. And so I thought that would be a really great place to explore this issue of what women can bring to policing. But there was another reason, and that's because although Chief Harteau was, really had put in huge efforts to reform the police department, the department was still struggling with some of the issues that police departments and communities were struggling with nationwide. And I never wanted to follow or look at what women bring to policing in a silo of the bigger issues. So I was very much drawn to Minneapolis, and it took me a little while to get to Chief Harteau. But I have to say that when I finally did get to her, she immediately gave me incredible access. And so we started right away. I mean, I remember they were having this promotion ceremony, and they said it's like next week. And we got our crew together, and we were there. And I was still thinking a little bit about maybe going to other police departments. But I have to say that the incredible women that I was following, I was very rich. And then just the unfolding of these huge, dramatic current events, it just became clear that Minneapolis was a huge story. And then we just never left for 2 years and followed it. I do want to say one thing that I am so sorry that Sergeant Alice White is not with us. She's very overwhelmed, and it's a very intense moment for her. And it's, I know we're a group of white women, and I just want to say that that's a real loss, but she couldn't be here tonight. Yeah.
So, Chief Harteau, I would love to hear kind of from you first, but then also from CJ and Melissa on, you went into this role with the goals to reform and, in particular, perhaps get rid of some bad cops. But it's clear that cops like Chauvin were still on the job. And I'd like to hear kind of what obstacles, challenges, large forces and systems that are in place work against the process of reform and accountability.
I went into this with my eyes wide open. I basically grew up on the police department, and when I became the chief, I very much had put together a vision of the department I wanted to see. One that had complete police legitimacy, one that was supported by the community, but one that also supported great police work and allowed people to show themselves great at all levels of the organization, of both genders and all ethnicities. What I think when I look back was a little naive to is I thought if I surrounded myself with all the right people and we approached it with the right mindset, we could actually get it done. And what I found was what continues today are ineffective processes, and policing, like other institutions in this country, have systemic racism, sexism. I think sexism isn't as highlighted anymore because we do have women in power or in position, but not necessarily in power. And some of the things that needed to change were those processes, because I think regardless of who you put in those positions, sometimes you can't make the change you'd like to. So I would say that unions, often I've been asked that quite a bit lately too, is what were my greatest impediments? Politics, first and foremost. I think if you don't have the leadership in the city, in the county in which you work, if you're not supported, your vision is not supported, you're not given the resources to take care of the individuals and provide adequate resources for them to do their job and for you to make the change. But also, there's union. We have such a strong union in the city of Minneapolis. And I think unions serve a very important function. They should be protecting the rights of employees, ensuring that managers treat them fairly, and that they have a work environment in which they can thrive in. But unions do outlast police chiefs. And it's really hard to really transform a culture when you have unions that will be there always and police chiefs that come and go. And for me, if I could have two things, it would be effective processes and more time to get things done.
And Chief Melissa, I feel like you in internal affairs probably hit a few of these similar walls. Do you want to perhaps talk a little bit about that?
I was in internal affairs back when I was a sergeant. And then again, later when I left, I was the department, I was the commander, and I was dealing with the same handful of players that put up roadblocks and kept you from getting to the bottom or the truth of what's going on and solving a problem. Or even you're not allowed to think creatively or out of the box how to stop a problem. The union is strong. The processes in Minnesota for mediation and arbitration, if an officer is disciplined, work against everything that you do. And then one of the last things, when I was the commander of internal affairs, by then Janeé wasn't there, but there was different administration. And when I approached them with serious problems and said, we have a problem here, we need to take care of this, and you're told, until you have a smoking gun, go away. And by then it's too late. So, you literally had your hands tied, and I felt like I was just a person sitting in a position and didn't have the authority to make the change that really needed to happen. And it's very disheartening because the same things that were occurring back when I was a sergeant, they finally started changing, but then it's everything, the wheels came to a stop. And I see some of the cases that came on my desk when I was there 2 years ago, they're finally just handling them in the front office. And that's like, if your kid does something wrong, grounding them a month later, it's not effective, it does nothing, and the behavior continues, and we see those same officers, they're the same problem. And when that happens between ineffective leadership or the unions, you're not gonna make change, and it's very frustrating.
CJ, do you wanna add anything to that? Or?
I think I would just say that the other obstacle, and it was something that you hear Chief Harteau talk about, trying to make sure that the right people were in the right places and providing the right level of support to those folks. And you hear Chief Chiodo just talk about the fact that it felt like things were beginning to change. One of the things that I think we fail to do frequently in law enforcement particularly, but I also see it some in corrections, is to reward those who stand up and say, you can't do that. One of the things that has come about in part as a result of President Obama's task force on 21st century policing, this notion that you have a duty to intervene. And it's one of the things we did not see in the murder of George Floyd, was other officers not standing up. And I think my own personal experiences in the department when I worked with Melissa in internal affairs for a while as an investigator and understand that, and had what I refer to as an opportunity later as a lieutenant to stand up and say, this is excessive force, you don't get to do this. And the repercussions to me as a result of standing up and doing that at the time that I did it included, I spent 3 months walking around the 3rd precinct that I would later become the inspector of, not having anyone talk to me, having people absolutely shun me in that environment, which is a hard thing for a human being to deal with and to live through. Not to mention the fact that if I had ever gone out and taken calls on the street, there's no way that anyone would have come to assist me. And we don't, I think, systemically within police departments, typically don't support those who do stand up and do the right thing. And so when we talk about processes, that's one of the processes we need to fix and adjust. We award cops for a whole variety of things. One of the things we don't hand out awards for is standing up and doing the right thing. And I think it's a space that we could address.
There's a lot of talk about training, and that is kind of one of the major points as far as the idea of changing the system. And I think, I do agree that there's some training that can be successful in redefining policing. But perhaps all of you could speak a little bit to what the specific needs of that training would be. The intervention, I think, is part of it. And then also perhaps how it changes with engaging in the community. Is there a certain tactic or different groups that need to be a part of that training?
We teach a lot of tactics. We teach a lot of, particularly as it relates to use of force, here's how you do the thing. We don't tend to focus so much on, here's how you make the decisions to do the things. Here's how you communicate with people. Here is a basic understanding of psychology. I'm an adjunct instructor at one of the colleges in the Twin Cities, and a class that I teach on use of force, we talk extensively about the fact that psychology, like Psychology 101, is not something that cops are required to have, is this basic understanding of human behaviors. And I think that's something that's missing. I think the focus on the tactics sometimes loses then the focus on the first thing. And the first thing is, how do you effectively talk to people? And we put labels on it like de-escalation training and communication skills and those kinds of labels, which are good. But really it boils down to, can you effectively talk to people with respect and dignity, regardless of whatever circumstances you might be responding to? And I think we focus on the other, and as a result, that stuff ends up kind of second fiddle. And I think it's part of the reason why we don't resort to those things first. We don't resort to the how do we talk to people first.
I have a couple of things floating in my mind to add to what CJ said really well. One is what we train and what people do on the street become two different things. So we train people in the right ways and we give them skills and tools. And somehow when they go down the street, it's almost like they forget their humanness and they're relying on simply the training and the mechanisms and not simply having a conversation and be able to communicate. If you have 5 or 6 people yelling at somebody, put their hands up, put them down, get to the ground. I mean, people are stunned and they're not exactly sure what you're trying to communicate to them. The other component, clearly in the United States, is we have this expectation of doing things very quickly, and officers need to slow down. When somebody doesn't comply within a second, force begins, it seems. And what I've seen increase year after year after year. I worked with the Police Executive Research Forum, and we did some work in Scotland and in other countries, and they do things much slower. They will actually stand and negotiate for hours with somebody with a knife who is only a harm to themselves, and they eventually negotiate to get them to drop the knife. In the United States, it's drop the knife, boom, the gunshot, and now you've dropped the knife because you're injured. But that's a societal thing. We as a society expect officers to fix our situations and to do it quickly. And the last component I will add is, I don't think we necessarily hire bad people. I think we're getting better with hiring processes and psychological backgrounds. I think, one, we hire young people who we don't know how they're going to respond because they haven't had life experiences. So maybe we need to look at maybe not hiring as young. And 2, I think we create those cops that become ineffective. And we do that because we don't address the mental health and well-being of those officers. They respond. Myself, I know I spent many years on the street, and I would bet I have a form of PTSD with all the things I saw. And you could go to just a gruesome homicide scene and see children that had been murdered, and then you'd go to a loud music call. And you never had time to readjust your mind to get yourself straight before you went to the next call. And there's been a lot of studies on adrenaline and the impacts it has on your body, and we really never get to recover, and we just go back to work, and people start to medicate themselves with alcohol and drugs, and we don't have an opportunity or frankly the tools and resources we need to address the mental well-being. And I think that's what you saw in this case, and probably what you see in many others. Oftentimes when an officer is involved in a situation like this, you look back and they've been involved in at least one other critical incident.
In one respect, I feel very blessed to have been a woman in law enforcement, in that when we spent hours and days training for the thing that CJ talked about, I would go home and my family would say, well, what did you learn today? And I would say, well, absolutely nothing. I would learn that I have to do this on my own. And I would learn that I'm 5'4". All these things that they would teach us wouldn't have helped me. And I learned on my own, what tools do I have? I have my mind, and that's what I'm going to have to use on the street. And what kept me from having to use force, I realized it wasn't the answer for me, and I had to learn how to communicate to people and talk to people to get to a resolution. So in that respect, being a woman in law enforcement, I was very blessed, because I had to put a lot of effort into it and learn on my own how to be successful. And that the things they were teaching didn't benefit me, and they wouldn't have benefited anyone that I was working with. So I agree, we teach to deal with the thing and not to be human beings and to work with humans.
So I think we have time for maybe one more kind of discussion question, but let's talk based on, you kind of cued us there, Chief Melissa, on the role of being a woman in police. And perhaps you could expand, all of you could expand on the idea of being a woman in this role of policing and how that is a part of the critical need for change. And I think the film kind of, is exploring this, but perhaps talk to us a little bit more in specific, given kind of what the department's going through right now.
This week we were dealing with some protests at my job. The incident in Minneapolis has affected all of us in law enforcement, whether you're on patrol, in corrections, that's where you spent your life. And, we had a Black Lives March rally in our city this week. And I reached out to the organizers and said, we're with you. We're not against you. And we brought them water. We led the march. We made sure they were safe. We had conversations and we said, let's continue to talk after this. And afterwards, my officers said, whoa, we've never done that before. That was a first for us. And, I asked some of them why, and they said, with the male chiefs we've had in the past, they would have never done that. That wasn't the macho thing to do or the manly thing to do. They would have, either let it happen and waited till they had to come in and use force to clear up streets or whatever, instead of reaching out to them in the beginning and saying, we're in this together, how do we do it? And I think, we bring a uniqueness, we bring compassion. Compassion is not a weakness, it's a strength. We bring that, we bring our listening skills, we bring parenting skills. We bring so much to the job to see people eye to eye and to resolve things. So I think that that's one of our greatest assets. It's some people may see it as a weakness and they're wrong. And I think that's something unique we bring.
I don't know that I can add anything to that. I mean, I think that I think that what we talk about equality across a whole different range of things, right? And we talk about the fact that there are still cultural gender roles that exist, and there are still expectations that are associated with those kind of ingrained gender roles that it would be really nice to be able to break down. I know some men that I have worked with who are among the most compassionate people I have ever met. I know some women who I have worked with who are not. And yet, there tends to be that differentiation that as women, in some ways, we are taught to not be aggressive as part of how we are raised. We are taught that it is not okay to be aggressive, and that permeates. I mean, I remember vividly conversations, and I'm probably going to make Chief Harteau laugh, but I remember conversations in which I was told that I was being too aggressive, and all the while looking across the room at a meeting at one of my male colleagues, banging on the table as he's expounding about whatever it was he was talking about, and yet me as a woman to speak more forcefully was not okay. And so I think we have all learned to use that differently. And I think that's a little bit of what Chief Chiodo was talking about, is that we have this space in which we operate where it is so important to us as human beings to be heard and to be understood, that I think we recognize that need in others in a way that I think men don't often or can't.
I don't even feel I can add anything to this conversation except to highlight what they said should demonstrate, if I had a department filled with that mindset, how different we could respond.
Well, I kind of have to wrap it up at this point. Deirdre, do you have anything else you want to add?
What I want to say is I think that, clearly our country's grappling with, George Floyd's death. And I think that it shows that a lot of reform has not worked. And I think in a way the film also shows the limits of reform when you have things like the union and a lot of forces and, and what I hope is that as a country, as we're looking at redefining policing and reimagining what it could be, that, you know, the women in blue inspire us to understand that women really need to be part of public safety and that they have a really important part to play. So, yeah,
it's true. Well, thank you ladies so much for being here and giving your time and your voice to this topic. And I wish you all well. Thanks everyone who's watching. We appreciate it. And there's more films on AFI Docs to watch through June 21st. Thanks.